seen, be heard, be remembered. Online events bring the world together, and the replays just go on forever. The live streaming tech is ready. The mic and the studio are set. Is the audience here yet? They better be. It's a show they will never forget. Hearts are racing.
It is a show you will never forget. Welcome everyone to Your Voice, Your Vision, Your Stage. I am your host, Americo DaCosta, and I am excited for today's conversation. My guest today is no other than Jon Neumann. And we'll be bringing Jon on stage for a great conversation. He is an expert in the subject matter that many of us may have heard of. Some of us may be more familiar with the subject matter. But today's conversation will be centered around ESG. Environmental Social Governance. Now, we're also going to hear about Jon himself, a little bit of his journey and his narrative, but enough about myself. Why don't we bring Jon up on stage? Jon, give me a second here. Let me cue up the camera. There he is. Jon, welcome to the show. I'm going to cue up my camera. How you doing?
Good. Thanks, America. How are you?
Fantastic. All right. Why don't we move the studio? You know what? You're the center of today's show, and two Canadian boys, one in Toronto, but one in Regina, Saskatchewan. So why don't we bring up the background of Regina?
Quite a different landscape compared to Toronto, isn't it?
It is quite a different landscape. Listen, welcome once again. We have an exciting conversation. Well, I believe it's going to be an exciting conversation because I'm looking at this as a masterclass. You are going to teach myself. You're going to teach something to someone along the lines here that may or may not be as familiar with your area of expertise. So before we do that, we want to take a moment and welcome and thank each of our guests who are joining us on Team Live, those who are joining us on Team Replay. Feel free to drop a comment. If you have questions along the way, please drop them in, and I'd be happy to bring them up and have Jon answer whatever questions you may have. So the chat is being multi-streamed across YouTube, LinkedIn, and today we are debuting Jon on Substack. So good times. We have a good variety of social channels that are going to be tuning into this. I look forward to it. Why don't you kick us off? Give us a brief introduction, who you are, what you're up to now, the community you serve, and we'll get started.
Well, I'm born and raised here in Regina, Saskatchewan, never left. Been here for a little over 4.5 decades. Grew up here in Regina. Sustainability was a part of my life as a young kid. Fun fact is my mom as a young kid, I grew up dirt poor. My mom was on welfare, and she used to go for coffee dates with her girlfriends, and I used to tag along as a young 6-7-year-old. I think I was about that time, and she used to carry a plastic bag in her bag, and she used to pick up cans and things, and I always just thought that was an OCD thing. I later on eventually learned later in life that obviously we were not well off, and it was more of a thing for Sarcan, was a recycler, and she did it to obviously make ends meet at the end of the month. So it's always been a part of me. Fast forward 18 years old, I went into steelmaking. Worked for a very circular steelmaker here in Regina called IPSCO. It was through 2 mergers and acquisitions. Stayed there for a little bit over 2 decades. Saw some of the greatest changes when it came to air quality, people, ESG, all those types of things. We talked about circular economy 2001 when I started. So it's something that's been ingrained in me for a long time. In 2023, I decided to leave my career after 22 years. Because I went back to school in my mid-30s. I went to first metallurgy school, and then I went back to McGill to get an executive mini MBA, and kind of lived, I guess my dad was very much prominent in the trade union part of things in the steelmaking. So I followed in his footsteps, obviously at a young age. Realized that wasn't my path. Decided to make my own path. So left after the company I worked for was Everaz North America. What I left, they were obviously owned by Russian oligarchs. They had to sell their assets, and that was kind of my time to leave. What am I doing today? I help heavy industry. And I help all companies, but mostly heavy industry. That's where my niche is. But I love to help the companies with the 3 Ps: people, planet, and profit. So obviously that's a very big part of ESG and the bottom line, showing companies really how to change their day-to-day operation-wise. But the most important part of ESG to me is, as you'll find out, is the people side. The people side is what drives the profit and everything else. It's including so it's the social factors to me are the big draw, but they're also the uncomfortable. So that's what I do today is, reach out to companies and obviously help them with their culture, with their team, with their mindset change, and obviously be impactful in their operations for now, today, tomorrow, and in the future for generations.
Fantastic. That is a fascinating intro story and part of your narrative. Thank you for sharing that. Now, let's dive in a little deeper, because I spent some time reading your bio, and the one thing that really sticks out, what part of your journey do you think shaped where you are today? Why don't we set the stage with that, and then move on from there?
Not going to school. I think jumping from 18 years old, not even thinking about going to university or thinking about taking a gap, or just going right into the hard knock life lessons that I learned in my 20s working. I made a healthy living, but that's the one thing that I wouldn't change, and I think it made me who I am today. That hard knock life kind of lifestyle, and not going to school. I don't say education is not important; it's very important, because I went back to school obviously in my 30s. But it's the one thing, if people ask me all the time if I was to go back and change that, would I? And I always say no.
Yeah, I took a break myself between high school and, continuing my academic years. I didn't think I was ready. I was immature. I was enjoying my teenage years, and I took a break from it. I didn't go back in my 30s. I was in my 20s when I went back, but similar journey. And it's fascinating to share that with people, and it's perfectly fine. I think it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's nothing to feel vulnerable. Listen, we go down this path at our own pace, and when you try to conform to what everyone else is doing, it's like forcing that square peg into a round hole. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna fit. And my parents, they realized that as well. It's like, we'd like for you to get back to school, but if that's not what you want, they weren't going to force me into it. I had to grow into it.
Yeah, I took my gap years in my 40s. So I didn't take them in my 20s. I took them in my 40s. I wanted to go ground running, right? And it's a part of who we are. It's our DNA, and that's your differentiator, right? It makes us stronger.
Right. So you said you spent most of your career in heavy industry. You started in the front lines. What lessons do you have from that environment that you could share that still guide your decisions today?
I think, I worked for a really unique company. They were a small farm. Saskatchewan's a farm community. We're very small. I think the population in all of Saskatchewan's probably about 1.8 million. Like, you got to think, GTA's got 7-8 million people. So our whole province is not even 25% of that. So it's the work ethic, and there's always been that team morale And it was built on people doubting us, right? It was formed in the 60s by an entrepreneur. No one believed in it, that he would build a steel mill in the middle of Saskatchewan next to Alberta and Saskatchewan's oil assets. And IPSCO made its name on proving people wrong. It became a world industry leader from making the impossible possible and having that mindset. So it was always a team. We're always given a lot of autonomy. And I think that's what really stuck out in my career was no matter where I came from, frontline to management, that autonomy was something that was always given and great, that we were allowed to fail. And as long as we got back up, learned from that failure and applied it.
Excellent. All right, let's step away from our personal narratives and help those who are tuning in who may not be familiar with the subject matter of today's conversation, and that is sustainability. So ESG, give us the Coles Notes version on what it is and what purpose it serves and what role it plays in organizations today.
I'll give you even shorter than a Coles Note. Sustainability really is winning today by saving tomorrow. I don't know if I can say it any faster than that. And it's really, it's using your resources and finding ways and means to reuse what you're making, find your waste, and keep that supply so you're not depleting it. And it comes from thinking outside the box. How does that benefit companies? Well, it creates different profit margins, different portfolios. It opens up all new avenues that weren't there before. Reusing your water, things like that. And especially in heavy industry, places like that where, water security, water scarcity is very, prevalent. But it's a cost advantage. Right, it's reusing. It brings your bottom line down. It helps with your profit, and it's good for your people. It's good for the planet, and obviously, it's good for your bottom line. So the 3 Ps exist for a reason. It's just a lot of companies look at the profit, the first point. When you put the P in front of it, and you find those sustainable measures, not everything's sustainable. Right, some things are going to deplete, but some of those things you have to sit back and look at what you do, why you do it, and how you can really hone in on those things and salvage them. I always say, if we all have a pantry miracle, if I said to you that loaf of bread has to last the rest of your life, you'll figure out a way to make it last.
So keep me honest, keep me humble here, and educate me if I'm wrong. But isn't there protocols and processes around this governance of sustainability that allows organizations who may not be able to effectively or efficiently reduce their footprint to buy credits from industry?
Yep. Yeah, carbon credits exist. The carbon markets existed for quite some time now. If you look in the media, you'll see 2 of the biggest tech companies in the world, Microsoft and Google, have spent tens of billions of dollars in the last few years on carbon credits to reduce their emissions. So it does exist. Microsoft actually just announced a deal yesterday or a couple of days ago with the country of Japan, when they signed a 20-year renewable energy agreement. So a lot of these projects create carbon credits. So there's a sustainable finance side of it. And then obviously that finance side is carbon credits are kind of like, is you can go to net zero from 100, right? Is you have to ease your way in there. So it's helping companies offset their intake with obviously projects, whether the biodiversity, things like that. These infrastructure projects create credits. So
would some not think or suggest that that's a loophole?
100%. It could very much look that way. I guess my question to you, and we'll use some simple analogy. Let's say you wanted to lose weight, hypothetically, right? And weight being your carbon emissions. If I see you in 5 years and you're the same size, I would say, and you keep buying Atkins bars, I would look at you differently and say, okay, well, Americo's not being honest. He's not being transparent. If I see you at the gym struggling and also shedding a little bit of pounds at the same time, being carbon credits, then you're trying. And that's it, it's continuously improving in what you do. Use the oil and gas industry, for example. How are they going to go from being one of the biggest emitters to nothing overnight? They don't have the innovation. They don't have sometimes the workforce. And the big part of it, the big stalling block is the innovation. We don't have a lot of this innovation yet. We can't just get rid of oil and gas because you look at my desk, my microphone, my water bottle, all made from oil and gas. So the carbon credits can be seen as a loophole. The big thing is companies have to realize that you have to be open, honest, transparent, and ethical. And it's your actions speak louder than words. If you're just, that's why greenwashing exists. And that's why the greenwashing laws came into practice, is because companies were promising the world and under-delivering. And people got very upset with it because, like you said, it's a loophole, right? It looked good on paper. It was checking a box, but they weren't doing anything in the back end. And obviously, governance and policies have to be implemented. There's a bill in Canada just on greenwashing alone.
Now, not sure if this is a great segue, but you talk about the 1%. Is this a good time to discuss the 1% daily growth mindset? What is it and how do you measure it?
Well, I've always used it as a personal thing, but I've used it in my professional life too. What it is obviously it's those small wins. And any atmosphere, work, professional, personal, we all struggle with different things, right? And 1% is showing up better the next day. I don't think any company is going to go out and hit a home run every time they try to innovate. Innovation, it doesn't happen. Apple didn't just create the iPhone on the first try, right? Those types of things. Alexander Graham Bell just didn't create the telephone the first try. The 1% is obviously daily continuous improvement of showing up better today than you did yesterday. And it's celebrating those small wins and allowing them to compound. And obviously it's as those wins compound and compound, now you have something. And it's that belief of showing up every day and just being better, that 1%, because that's an easy thing. If I said to you, America, I need you to be 100% better today, you're like, oh, that's a lot. If I said, hey, America, I need you just to be 1% better today at your job, that's pretty easy to pick one little thing that would show that 1% needle. So it's to simplify it more than making it complex, because a lot of these measures are huge changes in corporations. They're huge. They're monumental. You look at oil and gas, potentially. We're asking them to rethink and the way they do things and change their complete business model. You're not going to just do that overnight. That's going to take time. So those 1% wins compound. And obviously those 1% wins help your teams, the people. And you always hear me come back to the people, your employees, your stakeholders. It helps them get on board with the mission and the purpose of your company, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, and how you're going to do it.
Great. Excellent. All right. Let's take a moment here and pause to once again thank everyone who's joining us. If you have questions for Jon, please feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll be happy to address your questions. We are multi-streaming across YouTube, LinkedIn, and I mentioned that we are debuting on Substack. Now, I can't find the Substack feed, so I'm hoping that if there are comments, we will circle back to them afterwards. If there are no comments or we did not successfully connect to the Substack feed, then that is the joys of going live. You troubleshoot in real time, and if you can make it work, you do. And if you don't, you learn from it, and you come back 1% better than next time.
That's right. There you go.
So you and I had a wonderful conversation some time ago, and you had shared something that kind of stuck with me. And it was around you giving credit to the kindergarten values, sharing, caring, and kindness. And as a backbone of your leadership, that stuck with me. How do you keep those values alive in a high-stake environment that you're in today?
Mrs. Crow was her name, kindergarten teacher. She planted that seed. Yeah, the golden rule, being kind, those social skills. My mom was the gardener. She planted those seeds throughout my life, showed me emotional intelligence. It's the EQ part of it. It's turned into EQ as a leader. It's turned into being a servant leader. It's giving back. It's those relationships. That's what really matters in life. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account. It matters how you treat people. Job as a leader is to inspire people, right? It's not a title. It's to inspire people to be better. So those values have always been a part of me. I've always given the shirt off my back as a kid. And I didn't have, like I said earlier, when I first said I was very poor. I had very humble beginnings. And I've always looked at that as that's who you are. And I've always been founded on ethics, people, and leadership at a very young age. And I've never forgotten that, because once you forget that, obviously you forget where you came from. So it's been monumental, because people need that in their lives. People need to know that they're heard, they're valued, they belong, they're included. When you bring that to the table, I always say magic happens. You become David Copperfield, right? On a shop floor, in a boardroom, all those types of things. When you can create that kind of value, those safe spaces where people can speak up, and as a team, you can figure out how to solve this problem versus being the leader or the boss. Usually you're always the one, the go-to guy. It has to be a team effort, right? It can't be just me or her or the CEO or the C-suite. It's including those other people. And so I've never forgotten that. And I really I talk about this quite often with my daughter, is those soft skills. And I see it in my daughter as a 10-year-old, how she's very caring and sharing and very compassionate to her friends at a young age, because it's what the world needs, really.
Yeah, fair enough. It is. World can always use a little more of sharing, caring, and kindness, no doubt.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on. I want to talk about something that many of us struggle with, and I'd love to hear your perspective. You mentioned battling with the imposter mindset. And up until last week, I used to refer to it, as many of us do, as imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I was taught that it's not a syndrome, but it's a mindset. Mm-hmm. What's your advice? What would you give to professionals who feel like they're not enough to lead?
I read a book not that long ago, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I wish I would have read it when I went back to school in my 30s, by Mel Robbins. It was called The High Five. For me, I can tell you, in my 30s, I went back to school. I felt it hard, the imposter syndrome. I dove in. I got really uncomfortable. And I guess it comes down to my upbringing, your root work as a person. And it's just believing in yourself. You call it a mindset, and I'm glad you said that word, because if you think of things negatively, you're usually going to get a negative outcome. Think of things in a positive light. Usually you might get a negative outcome, but the chances are you're going to see it in a positive way. Right. The biggest advice I can give people is keep going. That 1%, don't think about the top of the mountain. Think about the next step, and then the next step, and the next step. And in 2 months, 6 months, a year, however the long time frame, you're going to look back at America and you're going to be, holy cow, I've climbed quite a bit on this mountain. And maybe taking a few detours, and that's okay. The one big thing from that book was every morning, and now I do it, is getting up in the morning. When I brush my teeth, I high-five myself in the mirror and saying, you're enough. Because sometimes we don't hear that enough from our bosses, from our spouses, from our friends, from our families. You should be your biggest cheerleader. Be your biggest damn cheerleader, because you are the most important person in your life. And if your cup's not full, you can't help others. So you have to obviously fill your cup. Thinking negatively, I think reading books, I think talking about it, whether it be through counseling or psychology, things like that doesn't hurt. I know it's a taboo subject, but I think that's how you grow. You grow by getting uncomfortable. You don't grow by being comfortable.
Yeah. So if you want to grow, nothing good happens in those comfort zones.
No, nothing. It's safe. It's a safe, and it doesn't. It doesn't. People stay there because it's safe and because they're scared because they don't know what's on the other end. We're not going to know unless you try. So it's your choice, right? Take that step or not, right? But usually we found out that when you do take that step, even though it's scary and the gut's turning, there's usually great things on the other side, and the growth is unfounded, right? Of how much growth you have on the other side.
So you shared something that resonates with me, and it demonstrates, because you and I have come along in two different industries, two different verticals, but the one thing that remains the same when it comes to the imposter mindset: start where you are and celebrate progression. Right? There will always be moments where you're going to question yourself. You're going to have self-doubt. But stop worrying about what other people are thinking. You got to focus on yourself. And by focusing on yourself and being, consistent, you will attract your tribe.
Mm-hmm. You raise a good point, and there's a saying that I've been preaching for about the last 20 years of my life. Measure from your own ruler. And it's pretty simple, right? I don't compare myself to others. My wife says to me all the time, she goes, "You don't care what people think about you." I said, "No, I care what I think about myself, because that's what I can control. I can't control if you like me. I hope you do. Obviously you do, right? But you know what I mean? You can't say, hey, that person has this and they did that to get that. That's them. They have a different set of DNA and they have different chromosomes. That's them. That's their life. That's their journey. It's you. And it's only you versus you. It's not you versus him or you versus her. It's you versus you. And that's that 1% mindset. It's you from yesterday versus you today. It's your decision if you want to show up 1% better or not. And that's personal or professional.
That's right. And if you're setting a personal goal and you hit that goal, or perhaps you find halfway through that goal is a little bit of a stretch, it's okay to stop and rethink that goal. If you hit it, keep going. How far can you stretch yourself? If you're light years away from meeting that goal, don't throw in the towel.
No.
Right? It's time for pivot. Time to rethink your strategy. Make sure that, hey, you realize your goal wasn't realistic. Is it attainable? Yes. Is it attainable in 3 months? Probably not. No reason to give up on it and say, I knew it. I wasn't good enough. I knew that this is exactly what was going to happen. And you touched on it. Negative mindset brings negative energy, brings a negative outcome. So always think of that silver lining. Always look at what progression you've made, what progress have you made, and more importantly, what have you learned when you fall, and what does it take to get you back on your feet and back in the right lane? But what did you learn during that period?
I think there's a famous quote from Churchill, and it's about success. And he said, success is going from failure to failure with a smile on your face.
That's right. Now, that is that's a fascinating quote, and it's so true, and it resonates with myself, and I'm sure it resonates with many others, which kind of leads to, I think, what you and I very similarly attach ourselves to, and that is actually, that's an oxymoron. We don't attach ourselves to titles, right? I learned that you're not much of a title chaser. Neither am I. But what does it look like in practice not to chase titles, just to be yourself? We hear so many creators, leaders talk about, bring your authentic self. But sometimes your authentic self comes with a title. I've never looked at a title. I've never chased a title. what are your thoughts on this whole subject matter?
I think a title to me is just a part of a job. What you are known for is your legacy, and your legacy is how you treat people. No one's ever going to remember me as a CEO or a founder or a steel operations manager as this. I'll either be known as a loving dad, a caring husband, a weird guy that plays pickleball, a guy that will bend over backwards for people. That's what I'll be remembered for. That's going to be my legacy, is helping companies lower their, it's, whether it's going to be the ESG doctor or guru, whatever you want to call me. Those are just words. It's being remembered for how you made people feel. So I think society, we love those titles, right? Is someone sees the word CEO and they think that person's an important person. Those people are human too. They suffer from as many of those things that we just talked about. But the bad thing is they're scared to talk about them because they're in those high positions, and they see that as a sign of weakness, not as a sign of strength. And I see it commonly, right? It's a common thing more and more. To me, it's about ecosystems, building people, and the people that you want. There was a study, I don't remember the name of it. It was back in the 30s, I think, for Harvard University. And it talked about the quality of human relationships and how that benefits your life. That's the ecosystem you want. Those human relationships don't care how much money you have in your bank account. They don't care if you're a CEO, you're a founder, you're a president, you're a prime minister. They care about who you are, what your heart means, what you value, what you cherish, how you show up every day. That title is just a nameplate. Really.
So you're absolutely right. That strikes a chord, and I will agree that titles have the tendency of boxing people in. Mm-hmm. You hear people refer to, hey, this is above my pay grade, or I can't do this because it's beneath me. Listen, roll up your sleeves and just be a good person. And that's what you do as a professional. You're trying to help corporate citizens be good people, or a cluster of good people that represent a brand in heavy industry. But there's also governance that comes into this. So it's not just about being good people. Can we talk a little bit about governance? Because we can all nod, and we see examples of this all the time on social media. And some people say, the internet and social media, it needs better governance. And today, some countries are actually putting governance in place for youth as to how soon can you allow, or should a minor be given access to social media. So, but that's a whole other subject. Let's keep it on ESG here. Talk to us about the governance and the structure that is being put in place to keep everyone accountable and transparent.
There's reporting frameworks. So reporting frameworks aren't mandatory in most countries yet. The European Union was kind of leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the world. They've had a little bit of we'll say recession, a little bit of pushback because of a lot of the data, and companies aren't prepared. It comes down to, I think, though, too, is a lot of companies expect perfection, which doesn't exist. Right? They have to have this perfect framework. These frameworks are tied to accounting standards, IFRS accounting, and then GAAP accounting in the US generally. Governance obviously is, SEC is involved, the CSA is involved here in Canada, the European Union, securities, things like that. It's mostly around being truthful and honest and ethical. Is if you say that you're going to try to lower your emissions by 30%, you try, you don't just take a loophole. You have, most of these governance things, we have one in Canada with child labor, supply chains. A lot of that stuff in the 80s and 90s, obviously, in the Middle East and in Asia, there was a lot of those problems with slave labor, things like that. A lot of those are gone, but they still do exist in certain parts of the country. Let's be honest. They still exist. We just don't talk about them. Truth and reconciliation. Bill C-69. There's lots of bills in Canada. look at Canada as we have an oil cap, right? There's a governance policy. We have a cap on oil, right? Oil production. Why? Because it pollutes. So it's kind of a mechanism to force the hand, some would say, of the oil companies. Governance has been around for hundreds of years, in many facets of government and governance, and it's a part of business. It's a part of it. Always has to be. There has to be rules and regulations, or else people will try to get an unfair advantage. So you have to have a level playing field. I think the big struggle in governance and those frameworks is there's still so many reporting frameworks around the world. It's very confusing for companies. So that's kind of another loophole. It's cleaning up. ISSB is the big front runner. And those
Now,
have
what
been
does that mean for those who
International Standard Sustainability Board, I believe, is what the acronym stands for. So they're under the IFRS accounting umbrella. They have amalgamated with a bunch of different reporting structures. SASB is the other acronym. There's lots of acronyms in ESG. TNFD. So a lot of these reporting frameworks have now come under the umbrella of ISSB, which most companies in the world will most likely be using to report when it becomes mandatory. Some companies are reporting because it's good for investor relations, it's good for capital, and really those frameworks are more of a governance metric to get a report card. Think of it as a report card for capital. So if me and you both own a company and my ESG score is an A+ and yours is a D, and we both go to investors and say, I have this project, we both need $500 million for capital. Chances are, Miracle, you're not getting it. Chances are I have an A+. I'm getting it. I might not get all 500 million. So there's governance around obviously a lot of those things. And it comes back to your promises, your ethical, what do you stand for, your values, what are your commitments? Do you have commitments? How are you processing? You're putting out sustainability reports, things like that. Governance, though, I've always said to people is been around the rules and regulations, the guardrails. Do we need them in AI? All these different technologies, 100% you need them. Or else companies would probably just use AI to fulfill a lot of this information and be done with it. ChatGPT, prompt it, and away you go. That's something we can do. We have to be ethical. We have to be honest. We have to be transparent. And we have to have really uncomfortable conversations about some of these things, because some of these things are taboo subjects. And they're new for some companies too, right? So the DEI things, like all those types of rules and regulations, no one likes rules and no one likes change. And that's really, I think, the biggest problem with governance is, I'm sure I've said this to you before, America, in our conversations that we've had. Up until probably a few months ago, I've only met one person in my life that told me they liked government. And the only reason why that person liked government was because she lived in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was there. So people don't like governance, they don't like rules, they don't like regulations, but you have to follow them. And sometimes they're cumbersome and sometimes they can be costly. But they're usually costly to people that try to skim the line. If you're honest and ethical, usually you don't have problems in life. And that is the same for business.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, we look at Canada as two Canadian residents and compare to other industrialized nations. How do we rank?
Not good. We lack innovation here. Our innovation we used to be proud in Canada to be innovators and pioneers. We've lost that touch. I have these conversations frequently, especially where I live in Saskatchewan, and we still burn coal. Right? We're still burning coal as an energy source. We have a city named Uranium City in our province. We have one of the biggest mining deposits of uranium or nuclear fuel in the world. We're still burning coal, right? And I always say there was wood, there was coal, there was oil and gas, there was gas, and so it shows how far back our province is compared to other provinces. You look at what's going on in our trade war. All those types of political things is we're behind the fact that we only have one trading partner, really being the United States. We have all these resources and we're kind of landlocked, and not even landlocked. We're almost landlocked in between provinces, right? There's interprovincial things. So We struggle in industrialization and we struggle in innovation. And we're a very small country. We only have 38 million and so odd people. We're a tenth of the size of the US. And they're leaps and bounds ahead of us, right? Innovation is one of those things that most companies go to the US because the land of the it's not because it's the land of the free, it's because they love to innovate, and they'll attract capital to innovate.
So what do you think our long-term strategy needs to be to change that mindset and that ranking and that stigma that we're no longer what we once were?
I think that the problem we have in Canada, government-wise, whatever you want to get, all governments are going to have problems. We're big on policy. We're not big on doing and implementing. Right? We sit there. Well, we'll wait. We'll do a feasibility study. We'll do this. We just talk about getting uncomfortable. Sometimes you just gotta put the foot in the fire.
Yeah,
big project that exactly a big thing that I get. Working in steel, one of the biggest projects that I never got a chance to be a part of. I made the Trans Mountain. My team has made the Trans Mountain pipeline. One of the biggest projects that we never made. Now resurfacing on the books. It was the Energy East, which went from Alberta all the way to New Brunswick. Now that's been scrapped. About 15 years ago, it was scrapped. Now the Port of Churchill job isn't in the news lately between Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. So what it allows our resources to get to the Eastern European markets. People say to me, "You're ESG focused. What do you believe?" And I said, "I think you should do it." They say, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because we won't have any access to these markets." I said, "We should have did it 15 years ago. The cost was a lot cheaper, but we didn't. That's our mistake. We should have learned from that mistake and do it now." The funny thing is I always say to people is just think about that. Is 15 years ago, this option wasn't there. Why? Climate change. Climate change has melted some of that ice in Churchill, where now it's given us a way. And it's a shorter run. It's a shorter run for boats to go from the Hudson Bay to Europe. So it's spearheading these projects, but to get a pipeline, for example, done in the United States, you probably get the red tape done within inside of a year. Canada, 3 or 4. There's more population in the US, so there's more people hazards, there's more hazards of a spill, all those things. So why is it 3 times as less? We have more land here, less space, less risk, right? Of hurting people, spillage, all those types of things. Like pipe goes through a huge chemistry check to make sure it doesn't fail. It transports water and all these other things. So it's just, I think, lifting all these guardrails that are in place and easing them and thinking outside the box. And these systems have been in place for a long time, and it's time to change those systems. It's time to have those uncomfortable conversations of which systems don't work anymore and which ones actually do, and how can we get better at them, 1% better at them. And obviously these projects, and Canada's rich in resources, but we're heavy on bureaucracy and red tape. So those don't match. They're not a winning formula. So one has to, figure out how do you make them seamless, and those moving parts, those moving wheels. How do you make those wheels move? Because it just seems everything gets binded down in bureaucracy and red tape and policy. Right? It's happening here in my province. We've been talking about nuclear reactors since 1999. It's 2025. We don't even have a project done yet. Like I said, and it's red tape. It's feasibility studies. It's all these things. It's what's the hurry? Like what's hurry up and wait? Isn't going to get you anywhere.
All right. Is this where you come in as a professional to help accelerate the process? Where do you fit into all of this?
I help companies, obviously, with their ESG strategies, frameworks, but frameworks are the first stage. I like to help more on the people side of things and help implementing it and changing the way you do your business. So whether it's steelmaking, mining, it's changing those processes, and it's not. Companies are run historically top down, the CEO down to the employee generally. I've always believed, and I showed it as a leader, is you run bottom up. The foundation is stronger on the bottom than it is in the C-suite, and the change happens at the bottom. So I help companies obviously with that type of strategy when it comes to sustainability strategies and figuring out how to these frameworks are what their goals are to the world, right? Their accounting goals, their the double materiality assessments is what they call them, is what harm they do to the world and what harm climate change and ESG does to their business, and figuring out, okay, I'm going to cut my emissions. So it's helping change those processes, and changing those processes in their day-to-day is innovation. It's continuous improvement. It's figuring out how to make a plastic bottle differently with sourcing different products. So you're obviously having to innovate. So it's helping them find those things, and that comes with empowering the people. Because the people that are doing the work have to be the ones really, I always say they're the ones that put out the fires. Who am I to tell them to start pointing the hose in another direction? You have to be there to say, hey, where's the fires? How can I help? And how can we collectively get in a sandbox together and get creative and figure out that change mechanism? And it's most of ESG is obviously reporting frameworks, but a big part of it is a mindset change. It's you're telling companies that you have to do business a different way. And I guess the best analogy that I can give people is Blockbuster Video. Remember Blockbuster Video? Blockbuster Video was iconic. Netflix came in. Netflix used to give us DVDs, and they would send them to our mailbox. Netflix said, hey, you know what? I've got a better idea. Blockbuster didn't adapt. Where's Blockbuster today?
Blockbuster is gone.
Sustainability is no different. And I think I said this to you earlier. Sustainability is the new health and safety of the 90s. It's a taboo subject, and people are, it's going to cost us money. No, it's going to actually drive your performance and your EBITDA and your social brand value. Those are new things that people look at. The old way of doing business is old. There's new ways of doing business. Greener, you look at Apple. Apple's a big company, the number two on this, number two market share company in the world, over 3 trillion. They're still sourcing sustainable materials in America for their cell phones. Why? Well, the iPhone, I think, don't quote me, the iPhone, it's probably 60% of their sales, maybe 70% of their sales. It's up there. It's really high. Who buys iPhones? Younger generation. Younger kids are buying their phones every year, upgrading every 2 years. I'm 44. I upgrade my phone every 6 years, maybe. I went from an iPhone, I think, 10 to 16. So 6 years roughly. So Apple sees it. They're not forced to do this. They see that younger generations have, obviously the balance of power and the balance of wealth is moving from the baby boomers to their kids, and kids want those sustainable things, and they want to have a future. So they want to make sure that you stand for that, and that you're not just standing for making something cheap just to make a bunch of money. They want to make sure there's quality, there's value. And I actually just met with a recruiter from Australia not that long ago, and she said one of the most common things she's asked about in Australia, of all places, when it comes to people looking for work, it isn't compensation, it's not benefits, it's what is their sustainability and ESG stance. That's the most important thing to people looking for jobs in a small island of Australia and other parts of the world, not just Australia. I know it's a big thing in Europe. It's not as big in North America. It gets a lot of negative attention, obviously, with the US being very, they were pro ESG under Biden. Now they're very anti ESG under Trump, and now we have a trade war. So it's a very toxic, the acronym, and even saying the word ESG, people kind of cringe now because it's better to almost say sustainability because it's got so much geopolitical attention to it. And people think that it's, if I do that, I'm going to go bankrupt. No, there's lots of, Nucor is a prime example. Nucor in the 60s is a big steel company in the US. They were almost bankrupt. They invested in their people. Now they're the number one steel company in the world and have been since about 2000 or late 90s. Ken Iverson was the CEO's name. They went from a good company to a great company because they invested in people that believed in productivity and making great products. And they've been very instrumental, someone in the US, they're actually in the process of trying to get nuclear fusion. We're talking about nuclear fusion. That's a great innovation. That's something that I would never think about talking about in 2025. So they're leading the curve, and they're being proactive. And the companies that are being proactive in those ESG spaces are like almost like the people that invested in Bitcoin in 2008. Look where they are now. They're seeing the returns.
Right.
It's just it's change. It's different, right? And people, it's like delivering papers. If you had to deliver papers in a different way, people would balk at it. So that's not right. We should just drive it with our bike and throw it against the door. Well, that worked in 1960. It might not work today, and there's obviously better ways of doing things. And as you do things, you open new income revenue streams, and businesses are tapping into them. And they're laughing. We don't necessarily hear a lot about them in America because they're not those $3 trillion companies that are a part of the S&P. They're still in the S&P, but they only make $300 million a year. But there's lots of them out there that are making huge returns by investing in that green strategy. And I always say, it's a lot about being lean. And when you do get lean, you generally more green. It's not a play on words. It's generally what happens, right? Is if you become more efficient and effective, your profit margins generally go up, especially when you can control some of those costs and things like that, and you can get creative. Yeah, you may have to spend money, but that's the rule of business. You got to spend money to make money.
All right, this is a great segue. As we're wrapping up our conversation, I introduced a new segment today, and you're going to be my test pilot. You talk about being lean, being efficient. So I want you to do a little bit of role reversal with me. Okay. So I host live streams for a whole bunch of different reasons. And I see so much value in live streaming from a marketing perspective. It's great for top of funnel activity, brings awareness, brings community, keeps businesses transparent, keeps them humble, because it gives them an opportunity to engage in real time with their community and respond in some cases during some vulnerable questions. So with that in mind, if you were to host a live stream series, what would the theme be and who would you want to reach? And it's perfectly fine to keep it inside your wheelhouse. I'd love to hear your thoughts as to how you would map out your own live stream.
To be honest with you, if I were to host a live, that's a good question. The thing that I think, and you touched on it a bit, is imposter syndrome, things like that, is people have troubles being comfortable with who they are and what they bring to the table. And I think I would be more about developing the development of people and betterment of showing them that, we're all unique. We all have these, I always say, sell your why, bring your weird, because we all have our weird. And your weird is your moat. That's your strategic competitive advantage that no one has. That's your special piece. A lot of people are scared to bring that because they think they're going to be judged, ridiculed. So I think a live stream obviously is having those candid conversations, because it's something that we don't have enough of in America. We have these safe conversations in boardrooms, at pickleball, at coffee shops. We don't want to talk about taboo things because people, you can't say that. Why can't you? Why can't we have conversations about, the geopolitical situation in Russia and have a very serious, of what could potentially happen? We can't, it's offsetting times, things like that. I know I'm going off here, but my live stream would be about embedding people and having those uncomfortable conversations about who they are and being happy with who they see in that mirror every morning and how they become that 1% better. I think that would be I said, I came from humble beginnings. I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you I probably wouldn't be here right now if that 1% mindset didn't exist. Mental health, all those types of things have plagued generations. And I think it's time that we stop hiding behind these walls and start talking about these things. And yeah, they come personal and they very much become in the professional settings. I get asked a lot of, I hear a lot of people telling me, oh, we have a great culture. We have a great culture. And I always ask them this question. I'll say, the next time you're in one of your monthly boardroom meetings and some member of your senior level executive team has this idea, do you ever say to yourself, this is a very bad idea, it's not going to work because you're at the front lines? And you often usually hear yes.
Yes.
And I say, do you ever put your hand up and say, hey, you know what, I think this is a very bad idea and this is why, and list off your points? You know what they always say every time? No. And I said, well, then you don't have a good culture. They said, your team is allowed to do that? I said, I said, I am not perfect. I said, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. And I said, if you see my mistake, please point it out. I commend you for doing it. And I will thank you after. Thank you. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole for no reason. And I think it's those things where people are scared to have those uncomfortable conversations in a personal setting and very much in their professional lives. And you talked about titles. Titles have that control mechanism to them, right? Which they shouldn't have. And I think, I think we need more of a people, empowering people in their personal and their professional lives. I think would be a great live stream to help people have those safe spaces where they can talk about things. Because a lot of those safe spaces exist in private rooms, private clubs.
I also think that those safe spaces are fabricated in many, in many organizations. Because you touched on this, how companies try to sell culture. We have a fascinating, fabulous culture. You're going to want to come work with us. And then the minute you walk in, you hear, know your audience, know who to say what to, and know who's listening. So it sounds to me like conflict of interest, where culture is fighting, tugging and pulling at transparency and reality.
You know what I would call the live stream? Culture Suite. And versus C-Suite, Culture Suite, because you're right. There's a big influencer on LinkedIn. He's from the UK. And he posted something about maybe a month or two ago. And he said about 95% of the world's corporations do not understand the word culture. And I disagree with him. I think it's even higher than 95%. And people are like, you think it's that high? And I said, sure. And it happened right after the astronomer thing with the CEO and the CHRO. And there was a perfect example, a miracle that I'll touch on is everyone was giving this guy a bad vibe for what happened. That stuff happens every day. Let's be honest. That stuff happens. People were using it to go viral on social media, to get a bunch of impressions and likes and all those types of things. But no one was talking about that's their culture. At Astronomer, that was the loud behavior. Do you think no one knew that was going on? Of course the staff knew. How many CEOs and CHROs book their own flights these days? They have executive assistants. So that's the loud behavior that's allowed. Mm-hmm. That's a culture. That's the pulse. That's what a culture is. And that's what companies don't get. Culture, they think it's your First Nations, your ethnic. No, it's not your ethnicity. It's a bigger picture. It's the behaviors you allow. It's how you act. It's how you show up. Do you show up as a title or do you show up as a leader? And most companies struggle with that word leader. That word leader is used very loosely, just like culture is. It's a safe space. It's a box checker. Most leaders, I think, in companies are great managers with systems and processes. I don't believe they're all great leaders because the leadership is a people thing. It's a people skill. They complement each other. And you said, I've never once come across someone in America that said to me, Oh, you know what? I have done that. I have told my CEO or the board of directors, yeah, it's a terrible idea. It's always been, no, I'm scared to do it. And that tells me there's, you look at the job market. People are scared to go to work Mondays. People are burnt out. All these phrases, work-life balance. People want remote work. Why? Because what happens in the office. So it tells me that there's a people problem.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Probably a conversation for another day around that entire subject matter. I don't want to make this about HR, but you talk about culture. Hey, a lot of people are talking about ageism. Some people are being pushed out of the marketplace because they no longer fit the culture, or their expertise or their opinion differs from the new culture that they're building. So culture is always evolving, and people get pushed out of it, and people get recruited into it. So
I'm glad you said that, because to that point is I hear a lot of people tell me, the young generation are lazy. And I always ask people, why? What makes them lazy? Well, they would do this, they do this, they do this differently. So just because you went to work for the same company for 35 years or 40 years, and that's what made sense to you, they choose to go work for one job for 2 months or 2 years, then move to the next job, doesn't make it wrong.
that's right.
They just have different values. I said, and I looked at him and I said, are you married? And he goes, yeah. And I said, does your wife, do you understand your wife? And he goes, no. And I said, there's a person that you live with every day. You've created a family with. You don't understand her, but you want to understand someone that's 3 or 4 generations beneath you, that has a different value set, a different mindset, grew up in a different age. I just had a conversation today with a gentleman who was raising his kids, and I said, when we were kids, we used to use a baseball and a bat, and we will play and get dirty. Kids today are using iPads because there's technology. If that technology was around when we were kids, America, do you think our parents wouldn't have had us in front of those iPads? Of course they would have.
Absolutely.
The times just have changed, and it's that mindset shift. You're right. There's ageism. People think that, this person can do it better. They just have a different way of doing it. Not, me and you might build a desk and build it in 2 different ways from the IKEA instructions. That doesn't make us wrong.
That's right.
It just makes us different.
That's right.
And it's okay.
Totally agree. Listen, we are at the top of the hour. I like to respect everyone's time and try to keep this to an hour. Jon, it has been an absolute pleasure. I want anyone who is still with us or watching us on replay, share with us where people can get a hold of you. Where can people connect with you?
That nice picture of me there is on LinkedIn. I think, LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I have a consulting advisory firm called JT23 Impact Labs, is also on LinkedIn. But the best is probably just my primary LinkedIn. Send me a DM. My email address is on there. My website's on there. All those great things are on there, and that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to shut the room down. I'm going to cue off the cameras and wind things down, and want to thank you and everyone who joined and participated in today's conversation. For now, I say goodbye, but until next time, take care.
Bye.